Originally, we put a policy where in non-prod, everything was off unless explicitly turned on. That was probably a little too aggressive. And then when it started to get to multiple spreadsheets, Alon, I said, no, we're not going to be doing multiple spreadsheets.
Welcome to FinOps in Action. I'm your host, Alon Arvat. Each week, I'll sit down with FinOps experts to explore the toughest challenges between FinOps and engineering. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting episode of FinOps in Action. Today, we have a guest who's been to his company as an IT professional since 1998. A lot of time. He led his company through its cloud journey and established their first FinOps function. He was a speaker at FinOps X and serves as an active governing board member of the FinOps Foundation. I'm happy to welcome Cloud and Services Optimization Manager at Chevron, Scott Linn. Scott, how are you today?
Hey, I'm great, Alon. Thanks for having me on.
It is all my pleasure and my honor. Scott, please share with us, what do you believe should be the FinOps practitioner's top priority?
Number one, it's super important to secure executive buy-in for your FinOps practice. Without that, I've either mentored or heard from folks in the FinOps space just struggle on their journeys. Luckily, at Chevron, we had amazing executive sponsorship from my manager, our GM at the time, to our CIO. In fact, our CIO once told me, Scott, if you're not breaking a few eggs in this space, you're not being aggressive enough. And so I always kind of took that to heart. And, we did break a few eggs along the way, but, knowing I had that executive buy-in was amazing. So I think that's definitely number one. And then secondly, building a culture where FinOps is everyone's job. It's way too much to handle for one person, for one team, for even one organization. I mean, everyone within the company has to think FinOps is their job and work just like they would towards securing, towards, resiliency, performance. Cost is just as key as those other four elements in the cloud, and it's everyone's job.
And Scott, would you say that these both points are connected? So because it's everyone's job and not your job where you need to do everything hands-on, you need the executive buy-in to drive alignment and drive action across the board?
For sure. I mean, look, at Chevron, it's a really big company. Yes, our leadership definitely does drive strategic initiatives, but at the end of the day, the work gets done, at the engineering level, at the application owner level, and that's where the culture of FinOps is everyone's job has to be built. No executive mandate is going to. I mean, with a company as big as Chevron, for sure, no executive mandate's going to land, strong with, an engineer at the engineer level. It's got to be that grassroots push and just that culture built over time where, everyone's getting involved in the FinOps practice.
Got it. And you mentioned the importance of breaking some eggs along the way. Yeah, I know that you've been in touch with many FinOps practitioners. I know you also mentored a lot of FinOps practitioners. Do you feel that this is a mentality that is often missing for FinOps practitioners? So they're too careful and invest too much in not hurting other people?
I do think there's an element of, you've got to have things perfect before you can, take action on things, or, whether it be your automation or your change management practice. I know there's a lot of risk aversity in, taking actions in productions. I always took the approach of, hey, we've got some areas where, they're not as critical. Let's do everything there and let's just do it. We're just going to send a quick little note out, like in a sandbox space. The sandbox space is not only there for our engineers to try things. It's there for me to try things too, right? And so, they get hit with it first, and then often you can get some really great feedback straight away from folks that are really attuned to using cloud because they're in there in their sandbox environments doing a lot of work and pushing the envelope, and then go to non-prod, and then eventually with a lot of things we do in our FinOps practice, we do them in prod as well. And obviously, yes, you do take a little more care. Maybe your processes are high graded for a production environment. Maybe there's more exception availability, those sorts of things. Um, but I think if you take too long to get something done, or you try to build a perfect process before you even start, you're almost never going to get started.
That's a great advice. And I love the point about the sandbox. It's also sandbox for FinOps, not only for engineers. That is absolutely a great advice. And I want to double click on that. When you started taking action in sandbox environments, did you do it yourself, or did you ask the engineers to do it, or you wanted their cooperation as well?
A lot of times, uh, we do push things centrally. Let me give you an example. With our right sizing program, let's say, uh, we look for performance on a virtual machine. If it's not meeting a specific performance profile, then we're going to size down and and shrink the performance as well as the cost. Uh, we just started doing that, and we turned our tool loose, and it did that. And in Sandbox, we just started doing it, and for the most part, we didn't get a lot of pushback. Generally, the pushback we tend to get is, oh, hey, you just resized me out of a vendor specified, spec of environment. And, we want to run that spec because, we want to get support from the vendor. Now, I would tell you that, a lot of times, vendors put out performance specs, much greater than they need to be, because a lot of times their applications tend to suck. and,
And they
and
don't pay for it. They don't pay for it.
yeah, exactly. And they don't pay for it. So it's really easy for a vendor to say, yeah, let's throw some, big M series VMs at it, and yeah, it's going to run great. Yeah, of course it'll run great. It's going to cost you, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Um, so, we have to work that a little bit. And, a lot of times you can get the architects involved and say, hey, let's work with this vendor. Let's find out, a good compromise where they'll still support something, and, we can run it at a little bit lower cost. So that's just one example of hundreds I could probably give. But back to your original question, we do a lot centrally, and so we push to the community from a central perspective. Yes, we do have things that we ask the engineers to get involved in and kind of maybe lead a little more grassroots, but a lot of our key kind of pillar FinOps practices are pushed, governed, and managed from the center.
Get it. And sounds like you need to challenge some of the conventions that exist in the engineering organization. So, like, if a vendor tells you need a specific specs, don't take it for granted. Let's challenge that and see if we can use something that is cheaper. Did you find yourself through your FinOps journey challenging conventions a lot?
Yeah, yes. Gosh, I mean, I mentioned one with right sizing. I'll give you another really common one. that we saw along the way with our parking or our nightly shutdown, weekend shutdown process. So, we originally we put a policy where in non-prod, uh, everything was off unless explicitly turned on. That was probably a little too aggressive. So eventually we got to where we're at today, which is 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Uh, it's on, and then 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. it's off. VMs we're talking about here, and on the weekends. So we run kind of a 5 by 12 shop, if you will, for the VMs to be on. Now, a lot of times at first we would start to get, oh well, we need an exception because we're running this batch job overnight, and the VM needs to be on, and that's very common. And so we just said, hey, look, here's a automation process where we can turn your VM back on when the batch job runs, and it'll shut it off when the batch job is over. Or better yet, let's modernize this batch job so we don't even need to, run it overnight or, whatever. It can be done an entirely different way. And so, that's just one more example of something that's super common that we had to work through. And actually to extend, even with our own central patching process. Oh, how can I patch these machines? They're all turned off. Oh, well, you can go in and turn these machines back on. Like it's really not that hard, and we just had to engineer, some of our processes a little bit differently, and voila, we're able to, facilitate the FinOps practice as we'd like it designed, and not necessarily hinder, either the business function or even our own central IT operations trying to do work.
That's really cool. And I feel like a lot of the things that you did at Chevron, Scott, are things that many other freelance practitioners won't allow themselves to do because it's a bit too aggressive. I wanted to ask if you feel that you were able to do that and do it successfully because of your tenure at Chevron, because people know you, I don't know, respect you, you have more legitimacy. And I wonder if you would recommend the same practices for someone who just joined a new company and starting his finance journey there.
I think, having the executive buy-in, being in a leadership role, having a lot of support, having a lot of context. I mean, all of those things are great to have, uh, but at the same time, I think I've worked with practitioners and had them be able to achieve a similar level of process, um, without necessarily having the title. I mean, look, my title, yes, I'm doing pretty well at Chevron, but at the same time, I don't have solid lines to a lot of people in the organization, right? I mean, I do a ton of leading through Align and Inspire, and getting folks to take action on things when it's either not their priority or you know not something that they really want to do. So I do think there is a bit of a skill that, and it is a leadership skill that you have to have, when you're engaging with with your organization in the FinOps space. I honestly, I think what enables us to, potentially be as mature in our practice as we are is just, the amount of all in our organization has been in our infrastructure as code space and building out our CI/CD processes with our pipelines. It's very, with our Azure policies, like all the governance and uh, the architecture that we have built through the 10-year journey has really enabled us to, be aggressive and accelerate our FinOps practice. I think without those things, it would be a lot harder, right? Because automation's the key to being able to do something at the scale that Chevron operates And I think we've done really well um, in that building out the framework of the automation and being able to plug the FinOps space into it is a little more seamless than it might be if you didn't have all of that.
And can you give us maybe one or two examples for automations you developed that help you scale up your FinOps program?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of our very first automations was we did the VM shutdown startup through our own homegrown automation. That was like one of the first things that we had put out. We had a tag called runtime, and you had a variable you could put into the tag. And then you had some automation working in the background that would just read tags all the time. And, when the time hit, it would take the action, right? Shut it down or turn it on. Uh, it, uh, it worked really great with like one exception, the fact that we had made an engineering choice that, uh, and this is Azure here, so in resource groups we would give application owners limited contributor access or limited owner contributor access, so they had the ability to change their tags. Now I tried my darndest to get Microsoft to kind of separate the R back, from being able to manage tags from this role, and to no avail. And so what we started to see was, folks would modify their tags, and all of a sudden we were getting kind of exemption to our policies start to pop up a lot. So it wasn't a perfect process. And the other thing too is, if we had to, maybe extend time, uh, you would find folks going in and kind of, changing the tags so that they could turn the VMs on or off. So anyway, it was a good process, but it wasn't enterprise scalable. We ended up bringing in a tool to help, kind of high grade the process. But that's kind of what you're doing as you mature your FinOps practice, right? You start with something, maybe it's homegrown, like I'm describing here. Maybe you brought in a tool and you took a first pass at at doing something from a FinOps perspective, and you're saying, okay, hey, now I'm coming back around and seeing how this is working. Maybe I've got a few things going now. Uh, and hey, I'm going to high grade this, and this is how it's going to, this is how we're going to high grade it. And you're just kind of constantly going back through and saying, hey, what, how are these things working, and what can we do better here? So that's one area. We did automation to delete unattached disks, and to delete empty app service plans that had nothing attached to them, just costing money for no reason. So we've done that. Um, we've built a lot of automation around our exception processes where, folks can go in and say, hey, I don't want you to do a resize, or I don't want you to move my machine to spot or whatever. And then our automation kind of works with the process that's facilitating and says, okay, hey, here's an exception case, puts it into a database, or, sets an exception inside that system. And, so you've got either multiple tools or multiple kind of homegrown solutions, and we're tying it all together so that at any one given time, somebody can work within those systems to, make a change to the way it's operating within their application. And it's all about, self-service, and not, trying not to bug the central FinOps team with tickets. I mean, if I'm starting to get tickets for something, I'm already starting to think about, well, how do we automate so that I'm not getting these tickets anymore, and I could push this back out to the user, like adding approvers to, being able to approve exceptions. We'd get tickets for that. And it's like, well, why don't we just, build a self-service way for somebody who's already approved to add another approver?
Yeah, so it sounds you have to be very aware and attentive to things that repeat themselves, whether it's tickets, and always find the ways either to enable the broad organization or automate the process so questions won't be asked to begin with.
Yep, exactly.
That's a great tip. And we already talked a lot about optimizing your infrastructure and your workloads. I would like to talk a bit more about maybe data. So you mentioned you started FinOps 10 years ago. You're probably one of the first people out there to start a FinOps program. You mentioned that you're in Azure. I wonder, how did you start with gathering all the data you need for FinOps and how you built it through these 10 years?
When we first started moving to cloud, there was a service delivery manager that I partnered with very closely, and he was an Excel guy through and through. I mean, he loved Excel spreadsheets. And so when we started getting, our cloud bill, we would start looking at those things with Excel spreadsheets. And, I wasn't necessarily a fan, but he could manipulate these things and, it was, give all the insights, and it was great. And it worked for about 6 months. And then all of a sudden, we hit the limit on how many rows you can have in an Excel spreadsheet, which is 1 million. And so now it's like, oh, well, hey, we'll just, have multiple spreadsheet. And then when it started to get to multiple spreadsheets, Alon, I said, no, we're not going to be doing multiple spreadsheets. We're going to do something different. And that's where we started using Power BI. So as a Microsoft shop, our business is very used to consuming data via Power BI reporting. So we use the out of the box Power BI connector to connect to our Azure bill and pulled it into Power BI and started to visualize the data there. That was our first show back process that we had, just connecting straight via the out of the box connector and visualizing it in Power BI. That worked for about 2 years. And then we started to even, exceed the limits of how much data that process could handle. We were constantly refreshing the data, and it was kind of buggy all the time. So, we went to Microsoft and said, hey, we need a new architecture for this. This isn't working well. And they're like, well, you guys are operating at a scale where we're not used to seeing, and we don't really have a recommendation. So our team went back and we kind of created a design that actually Microsoft had been recommending for the last several years, where we would pull our data, dump it in the storage account. We massage the data and enrich the data with business rules that we have through Azure Data Factory, dump it into two locations, one into our data lake and second into our SQL database. Now, our data is so large that we actually have to do some pre-modeling before we serve it up in Power BI. So we do that with Azure Analysis Services. And finally, we're serving the data as we have done since we moved to Power BI. It's just the data behind the Power BI reporting has grown and grown and grown, as well as the amount of visualizations that we do against our billing data. And we're constantly, trying to high grade our enterprise reporting to provide more and more insights across the different personas, whether it be executive, middle leadership, engineering level, app owners, etc., even for the FinOps function. So, we're constantly, high grading in that area as well. And today, we're adopting Focus, and we're also adopting a new Microsoft technology called Fabric. So far, Fabric has been absolutely amazing. We've moved our data there, and we can transform the data in 95% less time with 95% lower cost. Now, I will caveat on the lower cost part that our central data organization is picking up the cost of Fabric right now. So, that could change in the future on the cost front. But I mean, it's been amazing. And so, if I was to just kind of summarize, well, Scott, why do you do this yourself? There's tools out there that can do this. And I think, you know, for anybody, this data is key, and it's absolutely critical to understand, inside and out. And I would say, look, if you want to bring in a tool to do visualization, that's great, but don't lose sight of what they're visualizing. The the fact that we've done this ourselves has really forced us to understand this data inside and out, and it's just so critical. And I do think, it has been a benefit to our practice that we've done this in house. But again, not that doesn't mean it's the right way, and not every organization is going to have the resources and the or capability to be able to do it in house. And I get that, but just if you're gonna do it with a tool, just don't lose sight of that.
Absolutely. And it's incredible to hear how many times you had to reinvent yourself through the process. Like, this is the third architecture for your data pipelines, and you're thinking about what's going to be the next one. Also, on the workload optimization aspect, sounds like you're always identifying patterns to automate, and then also doing a fine tuning to that. Would you say that reinventing yourself and reinventing your finance operation was a big part of your success at Chevron?
I mean, there's a lot of things I could point to that make the journey successful at Chevron, but for sure, if you're, I think the theme. So for those of you who've gone to FinOps X, and if you were there last year, the key theme was there are no runners. Now, the way I look at that and the way I say it is, hey, we've got a mature FinOps practice at Chevron, but it's not perfect, and it's generally never perfect. And it's very much the same as there are no runners. I mean, we could be running in, I thought we were running in our data space when we were pulling in, data into Power BI via the out of the box connector, and until one day we weren't running anymore. And we had to go through and do something different, and we found ourselves back to crawling. And okay, we've got a problem. We're crawling now. Like, what do we do? How do we get back to running? And so I think you've got to constantly do that in the FinOps space. I mean, technology changes so quickly. These cloud service providers are putting out new services, every day. I mean, in Azure, and I know in every other, Google as well as AWS, they're constantly high grading their SKUs. You've got SKUs for all your major services. Next version, next version, next version. It's always coming. You always got to be, you know, following those trends, and trying to stick one step behind where the cloud service provider is going in your practice. So yeah, I tell people, sometimes it could feel like you're swimming upstream against a 30 knot current, and you just kind of constantly swimming and swimming and swimming, and you're just getting nowhere. It's a road to nowhere. But I mean, at the end of the day, you are getting somewhere. You're getting to the point where your organization is delivering maximum business value at the lowest cost as much as possible. And that's the mantra of FinOps, and that's the mantra that we have at Chevron.
That's awesome. And Scott, thank you for sharing with us all of these insights and lesson learned from your journey. I would like to save the last part of the podcast to learn more about you personally. And today you live in Houston, Texas, right? Did you move there for Chevron?
I did move here for Chevron. I am a native San Francisco Bay Area resident. Lived there my whole life up until the last 2 years. Chevron did relocate me to Houston. Um, and look, I mean, there's pros and cons about being anywhere. Um, and what I've learned is the pros and cons of about living in the San Francisco Bay Area are the exact opposite when it comes to living in Houston, Texas. So, just really quick, the cost of living, that's kind of a con if you're in the East, if you're in the San Francisco area versus, I mean, it's amazing the cost of living in Texas. On the other side, you have the weather. I mean, I would say the weather is not necessarily amazing in Houston, uh, or the scenery, like the beautiful landscapes and mountains and that sort of thing. Uh, Very flat here in Houston versus, the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, the weather's gorgeous and, the scenery is really nice and you can get out and do stuff.
I guess there is a reason why the cost of living there is so high.
That's true. There are reasons why people pay to live in California.
Yes. And you're now finishing with Chevron, right? What's next for you?
Yeah. So after almost 28 years, by the time I leave Chevron, I am retiring, if you will, from Chevron. I've loved working at Chevron. My wife worked for Chevron as well. So for our family, Chevron has been amazing. And, just the amount of experiences I've been able to have at a truly global scale company. Um, I don't know many other places I would have been able to get that kind of experience, or, where we're operating at the scale that Chevron operates. So, I'm extremely grateful for Chevron for the 27, 28 years that I've worked here. But now it's time to move on. I've got a few years left, and a fair amount of experience and skill in the cloud and FinOps space, and it's a space that I'm very passionate about. I really truly love it. I will always be a practitioner at heart, uh, and I'm hoping to, just like I helped Chevron on their cloud and FinOps journey, I'm hoping to help a lot of other people, in the next several years, the same way.
And I wish you good luck with that. I'm sure you'll do great wherever you're heading next. And I want to double click on you personally a bit more, Scott. Is there a book or a movie that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yeah. So look, I'll keep it book wise. I'll keep it, right here in the FinOps family, over my shoulder. You probably noticed the Cloud FinOps O'Reilly book, by J.R. Storman and Mike Fuller. Amazing if you're getting into the FinOps space. I definitely recommend that book. On a lighter note, movie wise, one of my all time favorite movies is Clerks. I don't know if you've heard of the movie. It was done by Kevin Smith. It was, I think, his first movie he ever did. It was in black and white because they had like a $25,000 budget to shoot this movie. Movie's probably, I don't know, 25, 30 years old. And it's really just coming up through a service kind of oriented background, whether it was my first career at, in the restaurant industry, or, my second career in IT. For a long time in IT, is, as everybody starts, you're kind of in that service role. You got that pager, you're on call or whatever. And, so Clerks is just a kind of a parody or satire on, how the day in the life of a service, worker, it just makes it super funny, and it resonated really well with me at the time in my life, and so that's just been a movie I've always loved. In fact, we have a theater room in our big Texas house uh, that you can buy in Texas versus in California, and I actually have a poster of this movie, so it's one that definitely kind of hits home for me.
That's nice. That's nice. And you mentioned the book behind you. I feel like we should talk about every item behind you because each of them is really fascinating. But let's just stick to one of them. The shield or certificate you have there on the top. What's that?
So yeah, so that is a President's Award. I have I was lucky enough to earn a couple of these through the years at Chevron. That particular one, I was managing our global monitoring and performance, basically, ops manager type of role, and I did a bunch of work to consolidate and streamline our costs as well as the organization and the delivery in that area. And so I earned a President's Award for that.
That's
It was pretty
great.
cool.
That's really,
Yeah.
really cool. Congrats on that. And I think it's a nice way to wrap the discussion because after everything we discussed, sounds like this was well deserved. So thank you for sharing all these insights with us, Scott. If people want to reach out to you and learn more, ask questions, what is the best way to reach out?
Yeah, I think through LinkedIn is probably the best. I think I'm Scott Linn 925 if I'm not mistaken on LinkedIn. But yeah, I think LinkedIn's probably the easiest way people connect these days.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, it's been awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
For sure. And I also like to share a big thank you to our audience who join us every time, listen, learning new stuff, also sharing the insights online. We see all of it and we appreciate it. Thank you very much. Scott, thank you again. This has been another fascinating episode of FinOps in Action. See you next time.
That wraps up another episode of FinOps in Action. Thank you for joining. For show notes and more, please visit finopsinaction.com. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action.